The best societies on earth right now are those societies that have organically let go of their faith in God.
What if a society could thrive without belief in God? What if the absence of religion was the key to a better world? Well, my guest today, Professor Phil Zuckerman, believes that a secular society is not only possible, but preferable.
I don't even know when we say, like, is God important? Like, what are we talking about? Like, we say God, but, like, stop.
He's the creator of the first ever secular studies program in the United States and has dedicated his life to studying a world without religion.
Christianity is the foundation of this country. I'm like, what are you talking about? The foundation of this country is democracy.
Professor Zuckerman doesn't just study secularism, he challenges the very notion that religion is necessary for a prosperous society. In this conversation, we'll dive into the impact of secularism on politics, culture, and even personal well-being. We'll explore how the absence of religion shapes our political system, how secular values influence our approach to social issues, and why some of the world's healthiest societies are those that now have moved beyond faith. So do you think still the existence of God is a net positive to society? Whether you're religious or secular, this conversation will challenge your beliefs. Please enjoy my conversation with Professor Phil Zuckerman. Why did you think it was important to start the first secular studies in the United States?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a social scientist, which means I'm fascinated by people and society and culture and social movements, and that's what interests me.
Yeah.
And we want to understand people. We want to understand humans, why they do what they do, think what they think, believe what they believe, love what they love. You know, like, that's the whole point of social science. And, you know, religion is a huge part of human culture and human society. And for very good reason, there are religious studies departments all over the world to study religion, the history of religion, religious thought, religion and politics, you know, the whole, and that's great because religion is a huge, huge part of the human story. But there are millions and millions and millions of people that live their lives without religion. And there always have been people who were non-religious. Way back when, ancient India, ancient China, we have evidence going back thousands of years, well before Jesus, of people who were non-religious, skeptical of religion, critical of religious authorities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People who lived with a naturalistic worldview. And then today, if you want to understand the world, and you have huge chunks of the world that are non-religious, we now have societies where a majority of the people are non-religious, are secular. So there was no academic home to study people who live their lives in a secular manner, with a naturalistic worldview. They don't belong to religious organizations. They don't have religion as part of their identity, and they don't hold religious beliefs. And they are significant players in the world. They join political movements. They start political movements. They interact with national movements. They raise kids. They have jobs. I mean, you know, we didn't know, there was no academic home to study and understand secular people and secular culture and secular movements, past and present. And now you have more secular people than ever. So we felt there was a need.
When you started, because obviously, you know, you don't have a blueprint of what the studies is going to look like, the curriculum is going to look like. You're really, like, not shooting from the hip, but you're like kind of creating, and you're having the vision of what should be taught. What was the initial vision? Was you teaching secular studies to debunk different religions? Was it to just explain how maybe you don't need religion? Like, what was the vision of what you wanted to teach in that?
Well, definitely not. The vision was not to debunk religions. I mean, that's fun. I'm happy to do that. But, you know, religion is so multifaceted. There's good religions and bad religions, and beneficial aspects to religion and detrimental aspects to religion. And it's not, secular studies was not meant to take choose a side in that fight. Rather, the goal was to say, how can we better understand the world with a better understanding of secular people? So I'll give you an example in the realm of politics. A lot of societies, religion is a significant player in the political spectrum, and so counter-religious movements or non-religious movements are also a significant factor. Now, sometimes we could think about former Soviet Union, communist societies, China, that try to stamp out religion. But we can also think about social democracies like Scandinavia, where the social democrats, they weren't trying to destroy religion, but they were trying to create secular values and a secular state, and in many ways succeeded. And we can also look at places like France, where they have laïcité, where they want religion out of the public square. or even our own country. The first sentence of the First Amendment is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So that separation of church and state has been very important in politics. So just understanding, if you look at Turkey and its history of modern secularism, if you look at Nepal debating, should we be a Hindu state? Should we be a secular state? So just in the realm of politics, if you don't understand secular people, secular movements, and secular values, you're not going to have a full understanding of the political landscape. And that's just in politics. But I'll give you another example. People get cancer. We know how religious people deal with it. We know the kind of techniques they use to cope with cancer. Well, what if you don't believe in the healing power of Jesus? What if you don't believe in Allah? Like, how do people who don't hold religious beliefs, how do they cope with cancer? We didn't know. Nobody knew. We weren't studying that. So in all honesty, the goal of secular studies was to learn more about the human experience and to say, oh, there are lots of people who live their lives without religion. Now, if we find that those people who live their lives without religion are suffering, then we have to report that. We have to say, look, it's horrible. If you don't have religion, you're going to have this problem and this problem and this problem. Okay. What if we find that people living without religion are doing fine? They're excelling in school, they're loving their families, they're doing well professionally, they're living moral, ethical lives. Well, we have to report that as well. So is that debunking religion? Maybe. Or is it just reporting what's going on in the world? So yeah. I enjoy learning about secular people, secular culture, secular values, because it's not something that's talked about. People don't really even associate, like morality. Everybody thinks morality is like religion, but it's not. There's tons of morality in secular culture as well. One could even argue a more mature and better morality, but that's another story.
Yeah, we'll pin that because that's one of the, I would say the main arguments of the existence of God, morality. Where did it come from? How do you know what's good? How do you know what's bad? But when you talk about, separation of church and state, I think religion, I don't believe in religion, but do you think God, whatever somebody wants to believe God is, at least keeping God in society is a net positive. Like if you look at the Constitution and everything says in God, in God, in God. And we did a tour of, I don't know if you know who Glenn Beck is. Mm-hmm. We interviewed him and he gave us a tour of like his private collection of like, the guy had like $150 million worth of like the first of everything of our country. So like it was like the first draft of the Declaration of Independence signed by all the founding, like crazy. And like it kept going on and going on, but everything had in God, in God, in God, in God. So do you think still the existence of God is a net positive to society?
Man, there's a lot there you've covered. So first, quickly, when the framers of the United States finally rolled up, so the Declaration of Independence was just a declaration. Like we're fuck you, England. Like we're going to be free, and we're declaring that. But it wasn't a blueprint for the government. Mm-hmm. We don't cite the Declaration for law. It's just an amazing document of our history saying like we hold these truths to be self-evident, and we're all created equal, that, and so on and so forth. When the United States gained its freedom and then had a constitutional convention and people rolled up their sleeves and said, okay, now we have to design a new country. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how the founding of this country, like people sat down, debated and discussed, how do we want to set this up? How do we want to organize? So the Constitution is the blueprint of our government, our laws. God is not mentioned once. Nowhere in the body of the Constitution are God or Jesus ever mentioned. Mm-hmm. In the Bill of Rights, it doesn't even say God or Jesus. I mean, it's nowhere. So that's important to know that there were early founders of the United States who certainly believed in God, no question about it. But when they actually wrote down the Constitution, they kept God out of it. And when Thomas Jefferson was asked about that, he said very clearly, in his own words, in a letter that he wrote to Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, he said, we meant to erect a wall of separation between church and state. That's Thomas Jefferson's words, So are there a lot of early documents that say God, God, God? You bet. God belief was very strong back then. So I just want to set that straight historically. Next, I don't know what I don't know what God is. I've never heard a reasonable or clear definition of God. Forget reasonable. I've just never heard a coherent definition of God. So I don't even know when we say like, is God important? Like, what are we talking about? Like, we say God, but like, stop. Like, what do you mean? Do you mean like a timeless, invisible being? Do you mean a force for love in the world? Do you mean a ruler of the universe? Like, I don't, I have vague notions of what you mean, but each one of those definitions has its own can of worms and its own philosophical problems and its own empirical problems, and no one can agree. So even just saying God, it's like, whoa, wait, what are we even talking about?
Yeah, it will take one to, you have to believe
in something,
to,
but yeah, and everybody has their own definition, their own faith, their own belief. So that's an odd thing in my mind. I don't know anything else that's like that we would say we're going to base, even love is hard to define, and we don't base laws on that. We don't say, well, love is the answer. It's like, well, what is love? Love to you is different than what is love important in your life? You bet. Is it important in my life? Yeah, but I don't run a jury trial based on your definition of love or my definition of love. Like, we have laws that are meant to be objective. And okay, so I digress. So what I would say is you asked me something about a net positive. I think faith in a higher power, the supernatural, the souls of our ancestors, whatever you have faith in, if you feel like your dead grandfather's looking over you and guiding you and helping you, if you think there's an all-powerful wizard in the sky that can help you when you're sick, like, I think all of that can provide tremendous comfort for people. Like, clearly humans like that. Even, it doesn't even have to be in a Christian context. I study Buddhism, and it's like, there's a lot of teachings in Buddhism that talk about, how can you ease your suffering, and how can you, what's the best way to live a compassionate life and care for all sentient beings. So, but let's just stick to God because we're here in California. I think God belief can help people when they're suffering. It can help people when life is tough. I think it can provide comfort for people, so on and so forth. Is it a net positive, though? I don't think so at the societal level. So at the personal psychological level, I think, yeah, probably most people need that. If I took that away, what would be left? Like, most people need to think there's a loving parent that's always got their back, and that seems to help them get through the day and the night. And that's their business. But at the societal level, meaning at the level of our institutions, our hospitals, our courts, our educational systems, our military, our government, do those need God? Absolutely not. And in fact, if we base those things on somebody's view of God, very detrimental, very problematic. And I can list all the reasons why, but we can just look at the world. So what do I mean by that? We can simply look at the best functioning societies in the world today. What do I mean by best? They have the best quality of life, the healthiest populations, the most educated populations, the most equal in terms of distribution of wealth. They have lowest crime rates. They have lowest corruption.
You're talking about countries.
Yeah, like, countries, societies.
What are some countries that you would?
So
that have God outside, that don't have.
Well, we can start with Japan.
Okay.
So Japan has never been a Jewish or Christian or Islamic society. It's had some Shinto in its past. It's had some Buddhism in its past, but it's never had God at the center. What most Westerners think of God has never been foundational to Japanese society. Right now, Japan has the lowest murder rate on planet Earth. Now, is that because they don't believe in God? Probably not. It's probably some other reason. But that other reason is natural, secular, this worldly. It's not because some other magic god. It's not like, well, they don't believe in God, but they believe in Shazam or whatever, and that's why they have a low murder rate. No, they have a lower murder rate because of their culture and their society. Those are this worldly factors. They have excellent elder care, excellent child care, healthy populations. Not everything is perfect in Japan. I'm not saying it's a utopia. But when you look at the United Nations, when they rank nations by societal health and well-being, who has the lowest crime rates, the lowest poverty rates, anything you can think of that makes for a good society, the best societies on earth right now are those societies that have organically let go of their faith in God. And what I mean by organically is, in contrast to like the communist dictators who forced atheism on people, these societies, like Scandinavia, nobody banished religion. It wasn't illegal to be religious. No one fought against it. People just lost their faith over generations freely. Religion stopped being an important part of their lives. They stopped worshiping God, believing in God, praying to God. what was the result? The result has not been societal collapse or chaos.
Yeah.
So if you look at the healthiest, okay, so that's one way you can do it. So even right there, you can say, well, if God is necessary for a well-functioning society, we would expect those societies that abandon God to collapse. They're not. And we would expect those societies that are most believing in God, they should probably be the best societies on earth, right? Like if your theory is that God is foundational and central to a healthy society, then those societies where people believe most in God, the strongest, pray the most, go to church the most, those should be like the perfect societies. And they're not. They're the shittiest, worst societies on planet Earth.
I would say the foundation of like God is in the conversation of the United States of America. And when you think of, United States of America, you think of Christianity, and we're the best country in the world.
In what criteria?
The American dream, nobody says. The Japan dream, nobody says. This is me. This is outside of. I'm just saying, like as a country, I would say that we are the best country in the world.
When you say best, so we have the best murder rate in the world?
And I'm basing it off of when somebody wants to move anywhere, they say that they want to come to America. When you talk about you want to create a life in a capitalistic society where you could become whoever it is that you want. You could practice any religion you want. You can make any amount of money that you want. This is the country to do so.
Right.
There's obviously other countries you could do that, but when people think about that and the American dream and the capitalism, this is the country, I would say.
That I agree with. So as a sociologist, like I think what you're describing is sort of the American ideal.
Yeah.
So all four of my grandparents were immigrants. 2 came in illegally, 2 came in legally. There's no question that everybody wants to come to the United States. It's where the money is. It's also, but as a sociologist, I try to look at objective measures of societal health and well-being. And what
Like murder rates, like
poverty rates, inequality rates, obesity rates, violent crime rates. So you could say like, this is the best country in the world. I've lived in other countries. I've lived in 2 other countries outside the United States. I can tell you right now, day-to-day life for most people is much, much better in Denmark than the United States. So that doesn't mean everybody wants to move to Denmark. The weather is shitty. You can't be you can't have 10 houses. The richest people don't have golden guns. But in this country, I'll give you an example. Yesterday, we all got a text on our phone. Here, beautiful campus, right? Look at this place. Love it, right?
Yeah.
Yesterday, bold letters, live shooter on campus. Everybody, hide in place. This is here.
This was yesterday?
Yesterday. The entire campus was closed down.
Was there actually somebody?
No, it was a hoax. We didn't know that. But that's life in the United States. My kid's high school, constantly, when my kid was in high school, warning, shooter, danger. So you could say, and I'll give you another example. When my wife had a stroke, do you know how much it cost to take care of that?
I don't even want to ask because I feel like it was just ridiculous.
And we had health insurance.
Oh, okay. So wait, I would like to say this, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I will say that no society is perfect or no country is perfect, but that's even more the reason to protect what it was founded on. Because I'm basing it, obviously, yes, you can look at the metrics of, school shootings, like this happens here. That doesn't happen in any other country. But then there's also there's a lot of negatives associated with the United States of America, and I would say there's a lot of problems happening, but I think that's even more of the reason to, again, remember what we were founded on, but also don't let the extremes use that as for example, taking guns away. I think that's why America is America, because we still have, is there any other, I have to research, but is there any other country that freely allows you to have a gun, like
certain kinds of guns?
But it's not like a popular thing. Like not every country allows you to have.
No. So here's a good example.
Yeah.
Guns.
But you get where I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
There's problems with.
Are you kidding? The birds shit in Denmark?
Yeah.
Every society has its good and bad.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, depending on how you define, maybe your ideal society is one where, hey, there's a lot of guns, there's super rich people and homeless people. If that's your idea of a great society, this place is fucking kick-ass. I've lived in countries where there are no homeless people. Now, there are also no billionaires, but there's no homeless people and there's no guns. I preferred that society. Now, clearly...
That sounds like communist. Just a little bit. That sounds like that. But I want you to describe it. But as somebody, like, I'm just thinking about somebody watching it, that sounds a little bit like communism.
A place where there's no homeless people?
There's no guns and everybody's equal. You said there's no billionaires, there's no homeless. So that means everybody's in the same median and then there's no guns.
No. So what I'm saying is you can be, so I'll give you an example.
Yes.
A CEO can make 1,000 times what the average employer of his company makes, or 300 times what the average employer makes, right?
In the country you're talking about.
Any country. So you could take all the big corporations and say, like, how much does the CEO make every year, and how much does the average worker in that company make?
Yes.
And that could be like 10 times more, 300 times more, 10,000 times more.
Yes.
I'm not asking for equality, but I'm saying there's a big range between completely equal and completely here. So what I'm saying is wealthy people are wealthy in Scandinavia. They're just not as wealthy as they are here. It's not that everybody's equal and everybody gets the same cup of tea for lunch and everybody drives the same stupid shitty car, and but you can have extremes. So I don't like living in a society where there's tons of homeless people. Maybe, but I think Americans are like, well, that's it. Homeless is part of the world. There are societies where there's no homelessness. And if that's communism, I mean, unless you think most of those homeless people here are unhealthy, they're not well. Yeah. And so we live in a country where we're like, well, too bad that crazy person that's suffering can live in a box. And we're like, now, I'm going to get you here, Jacob. Ready? So you said that foundation, that Christian foundation. So number one.
Whoa. I would say when people think about the United States, because what you said, going back to your point, you said, if countries, you said in my theory, if God was a net positive, then it would mean countries that don't have God would be shitty. Right. And then the ones that did have God will be flourishing. Right. And you said kind of to the point where no, because the societies with God are almost as shitty as things. But I was saying that the United States of America is predominantly a Christian nation. And I would consider it, maybe I'm biased because I'm an American, I love this country, that it's the best country in the world. Sure. That's
fine. Yeah. So again, best is subjective. I think
of course. 100%.
Yeah, most people would agree with you. I don't think people are like dying to live in Denmark. Yeah. So let's take your assertion. So you said two things here.
Yes.
I have studied Christianity and I've read the New Testament many times. Where in the New Testament is there any mention of violent weapons as a good thing? Like, where does Jesus say, like, everybody to really love me and to love my Father, everybody should have a very, they didn't have guns back then, so he's not going to say an AK-47. Yeah. But he could have said, like, everybody should have a dagger, or everybody should have a really strong sword because I am the Lord your God. Of course, he doesn't say that. Nowhere. Yeah. So you cannot connect guns to Christianity at all. In fact, it's the opposite. Jesus said, don't resist, don't fight back. If someone punches you, you let them punch you again. Non-violence. If you've ever read the Sermon on the Mount, if you've ever read the Sermon on the Plain, it's very explicit. There's no way to interpret that as like, get a gun. He simply says, we love not just our neighbor, our enemy. Love. And he says, if someone strikes us, so Martin Luther King understood that. He was a good Christian. And he said, we're not going to fight back against these white oppressors. If they're going to sick dogs on us, we go limp. If they're going to shoot us with hoses, we go limp. If they're going to put us in jail, we go limp. That's Christianity. So why is it that where people are the most Christian in this country, like, what do I mean by most Christian? They say they believe in God the most, they believe in Jesus the most, they pray the most, they go to church. They have the most guns. So I said countries. You can do it by states. What states have the highest poverty rates, the highest murder rates?
You want me to guess?
Are they the most Christian or the least Christian?
Least Christian, I would say.
Wrong. It's the most Christian.
But I would say but I haven't explored every state and I haven't done the research.
Okay, so guess what? You can even do it by county. You don't even have to do by state. Just go, what counties have the highest poverty rates, the highest murder rates?
It's the most Christian.
The most Christian. Now, I'm not saying because of that. Yeah. In fact, and this is where everybody fucks with me, and you might do it too, but everybody says, oh, Zuckerman's saying it's because of secularism. No. Or it's because of religion. No. I'm saying, I actually think it's the poverty that causes the Christianity. I think when life is hard, people turn to faith. When you don't have a job and you don't have health insurance and your neighbor's going to shoot you, church is a pretty good place to go to feel comfort. So I'm not saying it's because they're Christian that they're so fucked up, but I'm saying the Christianity clearly isn't solving their problems for them. And where do we see people with the best health care, the best elder care, the best child care. Those are societies that have addressed those problems without faith, but with reason. And they said, we want to have low crime. What do we need to do? Well, I guess everybody can get an AK-47. I don't think that's going to work. I think that's going to shoot the violence rate up. How about everybody gets free healthcare? So every democracy on planet Earth, except the United States, has universal healthcare. Every democracy, except the United States. And what did we see when they instituted that? Violence went down in their society. Violence didn't go up, it went down. So on every measure, free education, here's an example. Where did free education start? Denmark, of all places, in the 1840s. Why have free education? Why should your taxes go to pay for my child's education? The idea was, maybe it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem that like you take money from me so that your kid can go to school. It seems weird. What we find is when you do that, things get better in society. You have a more educated population, you have more doctors, you have more teachers, you have more scientists, you have better police officers, everything gets better. So even though it seems fucked up, public education was a great invention, and every society that instituted public education saw the benefits.
So this is because we had a conversation with a guest that I interviewed yesterday, and it was kind of that similar thing. The thing about that, you could correct me if I'm wrong, again, because you've lived in different countries that have had this, but I guess where some people are fearful of that is that it sounds good in theory, but then what happens with that is you have to trust the person that's in power of that. Because if healthcare is free, then that means there's somebody in control that's choosing, okay, this is how it's going to be structured. This is where we're going to get the money from. So you're trusting in the person that is, saying this. And the guest I was speaking to yesterday fled from Venezuela, where, obviously the Chavez and everything, 100%. And he was saying that those were the early signs of what, hey, listen, we'll give you free education. Hey, we're going to give you free healthcare. Then we're going to do that. These billionaires, they make too much money. We're going to take money from them and we're going to put it.
Right.
So it's one of those things where, in theory, it does sound good, and I guess it can make sense in the right countries. But some people get fearful of that.
Oh, I agree.
You know what I'm saying?
Are you kidding? Communists talk a great game.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. Fucking communist dictators, they all, from Fidel on down to fucking Pol Pot, they're always like, we're all brothers and sisters. We're all the peoples. There's no.
I don't think what you're saying, but
what I'm saying is, so what I prefer is to say, let's see where things have worked. So, like you said, in theory. Well, we can just go see what societies have the best healthcare. And by best healthcare, we mean by health outcomes, infant mortality rates, obesity. You can just pick measures.
Yeah.
When you do that, I think you'll find, first of all, it has to be a democracy.
Okay.
That's a given. Yes. All non-democracies are the worst. So whether they're communist dictatorships or religious monarchies, dictatorships are horrible, horrible ways to create a good and healthy society. Yeah. That's a given. So democracy is key. So I'm against any dictatorship, whether it's communism, whether it's, oligarchs. I don't want Elon Musk deciding anything for me. I didn't elect him. I want a democracy. So when you said we have to trust that person, well, that's what a democracy is. You elect people into an office, and the office has a very clear job description. And if you don't fit that job description, you get voted out. So I'm for democracy.
Yeah.
I think it's a deeply flawed but best approach.
Yes.
Democracy is mentioned nowhere in the Quran, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Upanishads. Democracy is a purely human construction. Purely. God never says, and I say unto thee, the best way to govern yourselves is to elect your own representatives, to adhere to your own interests, and you can vote them out if you don't like what they're doing. Nowhere. So when people say Christianity is the foundation of this country, I'm like, what are you talking about? The foundation of this country is democracy. And it's nowhere in the Bible. Nowhere. Jesus never once said, hey, I'm God. Let me give you a little secret, people. The best way to run society, it's flawed, but is you should be able to govern yourselves. You shouldn't trust a king. You shouldn't trust a dictator. You shouldn't trust an oligarch. You should vote for your own leaders. Wow. That's what the United States brought to this planet. That's why we're the greatest country in the world.
Yeah.
If you ask me, if we are the greatest country in the world, I know we can debate that, but if you ask me why I love this country, I love this country because of the Bill of Rights. I love this country because of the Constitution. And there's nothing in there that is biblical.
Wait, but do you think it's the best country in the world?
In some ways.
Okay.
Ketchup.
Whoa.
I love ketchup. I love Bewitched. I love ketchup. I love applesauce. I don't know if we invented applesauce. No, I love much about the United States.
Yeah.
But what I love most is the vision that our framers gave us.
Yes.
And that to me is not Christian. It's secular.
I would say it's not purely secular. I would say this is the way I see it is that there's a mix, because obviously Jesus, you're right. He doesn't directly talk about democracy, but I don't know. I mean, I think that's why maybe free will is a thing where you have the ability, whether you believe in God or not, we all have free will, especially living in a democracy. You can do whatever it is that you want. With that, people create massive companies. People create what we had, the founding fathers. People create colleges. Like, people have that.
Oh yeah,
but
I love that.
But Jesus never talked about a college, or people never. But there's Christians that created colleges that you could say, well, maybe you created this college with the idea of treating everybody fairly, which could be underlying Christian principles, but just because he didn't directly say it doesn't mean that it's purely secular.
When you say treating everybody fairly, that sounds like communism to me. It seems like on the one minute you're like, like treating everybody fairly means, hey, everybody gets.
Well, no, I would say no, not from that respect. I'm talking about like with a dignity and morality,
Right.
like treating everybody with like respect. Like,
So let's take that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
So Jesus didn't found Christianity.
yeah,
He was born a Jew, died a Jew. The founder of Christianity is
you would say Paul.
St. Paul, right? So let's take St. Paul, treating everybody with dignity. How many times in the Bible does Paul say, slaves, obey your masters?
I think 4 or 5 times.
And how many times did he say, no one shall be held in bondage to another human being? No one should be another person's property.
Never said that.
Right. So even there, when you say like,
Yeah.
for your morality, what you just said to me,
Yeah.
I agree. You're a moral person. You're an ethical person. And you said everybody should be treated with dignity. That's secular. It's not Christian. Christianity says slaves obey your masters. Women be silent in church. Kill gays.
Well, I'm actually very interested in that, because that's always something that I've had. Well, they don't say kill gays.
Sure they do. Paul does.
Or do you say kill gays?
Well, Leviticus. Okay, so Paul says death should be in one of his letters. He talks about lesbianism, and he's like they should die.
Nah, I don't think there's anywhere in the Bible where he says kill.
No,
gays.
that's in Leviticus. That's in the Old Testament. You have to kill.
Oh, okay. I'm talking about the New Testament.
Yeah, Paul says they are deserving of
Well,
death.
Paul's not in the Old Testament.
No, in the New Testament, in the Christian scriptures, Paul says they are deserving of death.
Yes, they're saying no sexual immorality, no homosexual will inherit the kingdom of heaven.
And they're deserving of death.
Well, it didn't say they're deserving of death. It says they should inherit the kingdom.
Okay.
Of heaven. But I've always been super curious about that, because I'm like, well, why would that be in the Bible? Because it's if God was all knowing,
Yeah.
I believe he is. If God is all knowing, he's outside of time. Why would he put something like that in there instead of just saying, well, no man should have any man for a slave.
Yeah.
I want to see what you say to this. I'm sure you've heard this
Yeah.
multiple times, but maybe the way that I interpret it is at the time, because obviously it was during the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
And they're historically known to not be the best form of. They were in democracy, I think, right?
The Romans?
Or what was their
Caesar, an emperor.
Well, they weren't known to be the best politically, right?
Right.
And if the message was, no man should own any man, and then the Christians at the time, which I know it was the Christians, I think the growth rate of Christianity was very slow in the beginning.
Right.
But if they believed that, then they would kind of all have been killed, or since that's such I guess not such a strong take, but I don't know, the only reason why I think that would be there is because if it was any other way, maybe it would cause a really bad outrage from the Roman Empire at that time to where.
So see this is what religious faith forces you to do. Slavery's wrong. Know. You don't need to be taught. You know it.
Yeah.
If you saw someone whipping another person, your gut would say that's wrong.
Yeah.
So now you're like, well, it's in the Bible. Your brain has to go through all kinds of pretzel logic to make sense of that. Why would God put that there? I don't have to do that. I could say, oh, ancient people thousands of years ago wrote some shit down, and they were thousands of years ago. Slavery was a given. Women being silent was a given, and they wrote that down. End of story. The same reason they said that there's in other words, the Bible describes the sun as a bright light and the moon as a lesser light. The moon's not a light. It's just a rock that reflects the light of the sun. But I know that 10,000 years ago, they didn't know that. So the moon looked like it was a light.
Yeah.
I don't have to make up a story. I don't have to say like, well, God probably did that so that blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So you're having to justify slavery. And that's the problem with, to me, any ideology, communist, Christian, I don't care what your ideology is. Something that's so obvious to you, you can't just go, that was wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you do that, it's a house of cards. Then you're like, wow, if people could write that, then what else did they write that wasn't from God? And I don't have that problem. I can read a Shakespeare play and I can say, this thing here, I love this. It makes sense. It's wise. That's ridiculous because it's just Shakespeare. But when you think there's a book written by God or inspired by God, you can't pick and choose. You will pick and choose because you're human, but it's not logical. It's not rational.
So what would you say are your main argument against the existence of God?
Look, we're going all over the place.
No, but no.
I love it, man.
No.
I'm not like, yeah. What are my? Say it again.
So what are your main arguments against the existence of God? I'm genuinely curious because again, I always take this approach. I always clarify in every interview, like I'm learning. I'm genuinely curious.
No,
I'm 19 years old,
the best. I love it, man.
But again, I can understand.
We'll be here all day.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying with the slave thing, and actually that makes sense. That makes sense where you're saying like, well, I'm just trying to justify instead of you, where you're saying, well, no, it's wrong. But I think there's also different factors to it because we also don't know what slavery was considered back then. Maybe it was super gruesome. I don't know. I don't want to get into it because I can't.
Agree with that. That's a someone could make that argument that historically it was actually an improvement. But if God is all knowing, God would know someone's going to use this in the wrong way. Because I know everything. And I know that there's going to be a slaveholder in Georgia in 1810 who's going to use this passage to beat the shit out of another human being. If God was all knowing, he would know this is too dangerous to put that in here. See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
makes sense.
unless God has some weird plan, but now we're trying to figure out the mind of God. What a weird, like, well, God must have, like, you're imposing your logic onto something supernatural. It's ridiculous. So I think. Okay, so my main argument that you said about
against the existence of God.
Number one, please define what you want me to say. What do you mean by God?
An all-knowing being outside of time, creator of the universe.
Okay. All-knowing, what does that mean?
All-knowing means he is the beginning and the end, meaning he knows how this universe was founded.
So
He's created it.
So beginning and end implies time. But
he's outside of time.
So how can he begin?
What do you mean?
Well, when the word beginning or end, these words are time-bound words.
Yeah.
I can only conceive of them in terms of time.
But that's why you can't. That's why none of us can conceive God because he's outside of time.
So what are you talking about if you can't conceive it?
Well, this is my approach from it, and again, and I'm open to it, but I think that's why Jesus came to live because he says that he is a mediator to God, and that
when you say came to live, that's again time and space bound.
Yes.
But you just said God is not bound by time or space. So this is what I'm talking about. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, the idea of Jesus is that he came to live in human form.
How?
God came to that. I mean, to get into the specifics of how it happened, I mean, I didn't live. I'm just saying, like, the ideas of it is like, well, Jesus came to.
But let's stick
he was
with
fully God and fully
Let's
man.
stick with God.
Yeah,
because
sure.
Jesus is already getting complicated.
Yes.
So your definition of God is
a supernatural being created everything that we have.
okay. Created
Yes.
is a time-bound concept.
Yes.
When you create a cake.
Yeah.
So, but if there's no time or space here,
Yeah.
you're saying he enters time,
I mean, but I think that's also getting to the point where.
right? It's just words that don't actually, if you drill down.
Yeah, I
they
guess
don't
so.
mean
But
anything.
don't you think that's also too critical because it's also you could play that side with God, but then you can also play, well, then we don't know anything of how this happened. And yeah, you can lean to that. But to try to explain, that's why if you believe in God, you believe in God because we don't know this.
Right.
And he is the one.
Okay, so
you know
that's
what I'm saying?
called the argument of ignorance, the appeal to ignorance. Let me give you an
Okay.
example. Ready? I say, I don't know these things.
Yeah.
I don't know. So you ask me, well, how did it all
Well,
start?
actually, I don't know either.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you say it's God, I'm saying, well, that doesn't answer anything. You're just substituting a deeper mystery for what's already, like, how did time and space begin? We don't know. That's one mystery. Oh, a magical being created it. How? Well, we don't know that either. It's just adding a mystery to another mystery. To you, it may sound like an answer. To me, it's just, you might as well say, a Telercan did it. What do you mean a Telercan did it? Well, you don't know, so it must have been a Telercan. No, I'll give you an example.
Makes sense.
So to me, if I said to you, 3 doors down,
Mm-hmm.
there's somebody there named Chimmy Chibby Chump to Chumpa Chancha.
How did he come up with
I
that?
don't know. And you're like, what? I'm like, yeah, my colleague down there is named
Okay.
Chimmy Chibby Chump to Chumpa Chump Chump. And you're like, really? Are they from another country? And I'm like, no. Do they have some kind of, do they speak another language? No. And you're like, I find it hard to believe that that's their name. And then I say to you, well, do you know their name? What's your answer?
No, I don't know.
Right. And that's okay. Just say like, I actually don't know I don't think their name is that. That doesn't mean I know what their name is. So in philosophy, that's called appeal to ignorance. So if you say to me, well, how did the world begin? How did space begin? Why are we here? I don't know the answer to that. And that's a more reasonable place to be. I'm okay. But to just say, well, God did it, to me is not, you haven't proven anything. You're just making an assertion.
But does it have to be 100% provable for it to be real and for it to
No,
be true?
that's true. That's true. If you're convinced, no, absolutely. You can have degrees of credulity, degrees of belief. So if you think there's this all-knowing, but what I'm trying to say is any attribute you give to God is logically problematic. I'll give you an example. If you say he's all-powerful, this is just a silly philosophy 101.
Yeah.
God is all-powerful. So can God create a rock that is even too heavy for him to lift?
I've heard this argument before.
But so that means
It's a lose-lose, because if you say yes,
right.
that means
That leads one thing. And you can just extrapolate from there. So
Yeah.
all-powerful is self-contradictory. All-knowing is self-contradictory. You can say
Well, I would say-
knows a lot.
Wait, what would you? So this is what I would think of that when
Okay.
that analogy gets brought up, because for those that are watching that don't understand, it's
Yeah.
like, well, the heavy rock that can't be lifted, well, if God can lift it, then he's contradicting the nature of the rock, and if he can't lift it, then I mean he's not all powerful.
Exactly.
But this is what I think of it.
Yeah.
You'd say what you have to say to this, but God also, I believe, he created the earth with free will, right? Understandably so, because you can believe in God and I don't have, and you don't have to believe in God, but I can believe in God and he can believe in. We have free will. That's in existence aside of God, if people want to believe that or not. And I think with that analogy, I don't know, it's almost like putting God in a box in a way.
Okay. So let's take your definition of God, even
Yeah.
though I think it's problematic.
Yeah.
So my first reason for not believing God is I don't really ever understand the definition of
Yeah.
it, which I've tried to unpack, but I'll just grant you that. So the next one is I just don't see any evidence for this God's existence.
But does he need 100% evidence?
I don't see any.
There's no evidence.
Not that convinces me. Maybe it convinces you or you. I don't see any evidence.
But you don't think, I know you've heard this before,
Yeah.
but this is like, even when we look at things like a building, we know that there was somebody behind it. And I know you've heard this 1,000 times.
Right.
When you see anything, you know, okay, it didn't just come out of nowhere. And I was actually watching a video. It's like when you see a watch on a beach, and you've heard this
Yeah,
before, like you're not going to be looking
Right.
at the beach and say, well, you know, a couple parts make this together and it came to
Right.
be a watch. Something built that and put it here and it got here.
Mhm.
Like, wouldn't you say the same thing with everything? Like, I just feel like even if you don't know
So do you know the fallacy of special pleading?
no.
Okay. So in informal logic, if I say to you, every single book in the world is green. Every book is green. And then you say, well, here's a book that's red. I'm like, well, except for that one. Right? So I can't say every book is green except for that one. I have to say like 99.9% of books are green, but some aren't, right?
Mhm.
So if you say everything is created by something, then that applies to the creator too. You can't just stop and say, so special pleading is like, my rule works except for this. So if you say, well, this must have been created by God, then the question immediately is, well, then what created God? If you say everything needs a creator, that means the creator needs a creator.
And I say when we look at things in our planet, right? When we look at things in our time, we say, well, you know, there was a creator behind that. There was an architect. There was a
Right. And it
developer.
keeps going back
there's
and back
something.
and back.
Of course, but again, if you believe in God, you believe that He is the creator, and there was
Well,
nothing that created. We can't understand,
that's
but there's no way.
belief.
Yeah, but there's no way that we could prove that. So that's kind of a question
Right.
that.
So there's no evidence. So instead just say, I don't know.
Well, no, there's no evidence proving how God was not, you know, created, but there's evidence. There's evidence
Right.
of a creator because of creation.
Right. So
That's
that
what
means,
I would.
so that means
Yeah.
God, so we always assume, rightfully so, that the creator is more intelligent than their creation, right? So God, in order to create, you know, cancer and volcanoes and scrotums must be really, really powerful, more powerful than his creations.
Yeah.
So who created that God? You can't just say, well, no one, he just exists. That's called special pleading. You're just asserting.
Yeah, and I understand that because I actually, Dr. Shermer, he spoke about that. Well, the thing about Christianity, and not Christianity, he said God in general as well. Anything good that happens, God did it. But bad things, God didn't do it.
But I'm just saying, in terms of existence,
Yes.
I wouldn't
say there's no evidence of God. You think there's no?
Yes.
Like you look at the universe and you look at the stars and you say, oh, this all just came to happen.
No, I say, oh, wow, mind blowing. Oh my goodness. And I leave it at that. And I say, I don't know why, how, I am blown away.
Yeah.
And in fact, this is going to be really funny. If you say God did it, it actually lessens it for me. It actually reduces it for me. I remember driving with my kids when they were little, and I was taking them to choral practice, and there was this glorious sunset. And my daughter's friend was from a believing Christian family, and she looked out the window and she said, look, it's God showing off again. Because she was taught that only God can make a beautiful sunset. It ruined it for me. I'm like, really? There's a magical being up there who's like, look at what a great painter I am. I can make sunsets. That's the funny thing. To me, when I look at the stars, that feeling of awe, it's very powerful. And it's transcendent. I leave it there. The minute you say, oh, and God made it, I'm like,
Well, I mean, but
like
at that point,
well,
I wouldn't say that, but I would like, at that point, it comes down to then a belief.
sure.
But or just because, faith or belief, but just because you don't believe something doesn't mean it's not true.
Oh, that's for sure. I can
and because everybody has different beliefs, but I will say like there's not zero evidence of God not existing. There's definitely, I would say that's at the base, like because we have such a complex, and I have a question about that. Like there's so many different things that I would say like morality, conscious, deja vu, like different stuff like that. Like maybe that's not direct evidence, but like that means there's something supernatural.
Sure.
Like there has to be something.
Okay.
Yes, you can't prove it, but that doesn't mean there's no existence.
It's not that I can't prove it. I can't talk about it. So listen to this one, Jacob. Guy named Wittgenstein.
Yeah.
I'm going to screw it up because he wrote in German, but he said something like, he was a philosopher. He said something like, and all the philosophers watching this are going to gag because I'm going to get it wrong, but I'm going to interpret it. He said something like, of that which we cannot conceive, we ought not speak. So if we can't conceive of it, why are we talking about it? So what I would say to you is, if I can't conceive of God, if God's out, so I can't conceive of anything that's outside of time and space. That doesn't make sense to my brain. I can't conceive of anything that is eternal. I can't conceive of anything that's, all those attributes that you just talked about, I actually can't really conceive of. So it's not that I don't believe, it's that I don't have anything to say about it. I can't talk about it. It's how, in other words, Talerkin. What do you think of Talerkin?
I don't even know what that is.
So can you say anything about it?
No.
Do you believe in it?
I don't know what it is.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about God. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So Talerkin just means plate in Danish, okay? But when I say the word Talerkin, you're like, you're not anti, you're not pro, you're like, I am agnostic. I don't know what you're saying, Phil. I don't know if it's good or bad. That's how I feel about God. I don't know what we're talking about. I'm not anti it. I'm not pro it. I don't not. So when someone says to me, if I say like, what's your evidence? And you say, well, look at the world. That's just saying like, look at how amazing this is. It must have been created. And I'm like, okay, by what? How? It doesn't answer anything for me. So I'd rather live in ignorance. I'd rather say, I live in a mysterious realm. I don't know why there are things the way they are. What a trip. What can I know? I can know what it feels like to hurt somebody. I can know what it feels like to be lied to. I can know what it feels like to be hungry. I can know what it feels like to be cold. That shit I can know. Why is there cold to begin with? I don't know. Why do we get hungry? Fuck, I don't know. So to me, as a secular person, it's fun to talk about, where did it all come from? But at the end of the day, isn't it more important to say like, how can I treat another person that's right next to me better?
But I think you could still think about both.
I do.
You know what I'm saying?
And we both do.
Oh, 100%.
Okay, go on.
So does science have any answers to, morality to meaning to how we got started to deja vu, even like,
Yeah.
what is it like? Is there any answers to those?
Those are all different things.
I know, but those
Yeah.
are like the basic,
So
like,
to me, science is just a method. It's not it's not a list of things you have to believe. It's just like if you want to know how many teeth are in a horse's mouth, like you have a horse and you want to know, shit, man, how many teeth are in there? Well, why do you want to know? I don't know. I want to make a necklace out of horse teeth for my wife, whatever. So there's only, I think, one way to find that out, and that's by counting. And then someone else comes along and says, well, there's Arabian horses. They have more teeth. Well, let's count those. Oh, there's Icelandic horses. So you get as much data as you can, and that's how you know how many teeth are in a horse's mouth. So to me, science is just a method for understanding the physical world. It's just a method. Like, what causes, how can I best cure deafness? Well, I can pray, or I can find out what's causing it and come up with a technical solution. So to me, cochlear implants, which are a result of the scientific method, have done more to alleviate deafness than prayer. People have been praying to cure deafness for millions of years, and then cochlear implants did it. How? Scientific method. So it's just a method. It can be wrong, but the only way it can be wrong is by a method proving it's wrong. So to me, science cannot answer questions of morality. It cannot it might be able to explain deja vu if there's something neurological, like, our brains have these wires in there.
That is definitely weird. I don't know how we're ever going to explain that.
Or it's something, it's something magical. I don't know the answer. But to me, science is just a method for determining how the world works. So
Do you think we'll ever get answers for those big questions, everybody?
And that's why I'm an agnostic.
But agnostics means you don't not believe in God, but you don't believe in God. You're like,
so there's different kinds of agnostic. There's agnostic, like you're talking about, like I'm unsure, like, is there a God? Isn't there? I can't make up my mind. But there's also agnostic, which says I can't know. So I'm agnostic. You can be agnostic about lots of things. Like what's my colleague's name? You're sort of agnostic. You don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
So so the big mysteries, the existential mysteries, why are we here? How did it all begin? Time, space. I plead ignorance. I just don't know.
Interesting.
And if you say, will we ever know? I plead ignorance there too. Fuck if I know, man. Not my jam.
So let me ask you, does your disbelief in the existence of God also come from not a bad experience, but something where you got a distaste of like, well, I don't like this because it just puts me in a box, but they're saying I can't have sex, I can't do this, I can't. Well, that just, is there also a sprinkle of that where?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like that question. So I'm a third generation non-believer. So all four of
your parents, your mom, dad, and grandparents.
So all four of my grandparents did not believe in God. My parents didn't believe in God. And then I came along, and I was raised in a very non-religious part of the world, near Santa Monica. I was born in 1969. Like, I grew up in the 1970s. So religion really wasn't around me a lot. So I never had an authority figure, a coach, a teacher. I never had a mean Sunday school teacher. So I never had a bad experience with a God believer. I would say the closest thing for me was learning about the Holocaust. So all four of my grandparents were all Jews, all refugees. Everybody else got exterminated, pretty ugly. So when I learned about the Holocaust, I would say as a kid, that did, I think, I was like, what the heck? They rounded up people and put them in ghettos and concentration camps and gas chambers. And who did that? Oh, Christians did that to Jews. So that gave me a bad feeling for Christianity.
Hitler was a Christian?
Say it again?
Hitler was a Christian?
Hitler didn't kill anybody.
Well, I mean, commanded. The people in command.
The people that ran the trains, ran the concentration camps.
Well, but you also can say Christians because Hitler, I mean, you can label them as Christian, but I feel like if they were to not kill the Jews, which is, I guess, it's just a game of saying, well, he should have done it. He would have been killed. So, but I don't think just Christians are like.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying as a kid, you hear.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that Buddhists did the Holocaust. I didn't hear Muslims did the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that, communists did the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I'm just saying as a kid, when you're little, and you're like, what happened to Auntie Hannah? Well, they wanted to kill the Jews. Why did they want to kill the Jews? Well, the Jews killed Jesus, and Europe had a long history of anti-Semitism going back for thousands of years, from pogrom, persecution of Jews is part of Christian history. You can't deny that. If you look at every decade prior to the Holocaust, somewhere in Europe, Jews were being accused of causing the Black Plague, and they were rounded up and burned. Like, so it's not like the Holocaust just showed up. In fact, in the Gospels right there, in Gospel of John, it says, you guys have killed Jesus and you are guilty and the blood is on your head, Jews as a collective people. So it's right there in the Gospel of John. Paul, it's very clear that Jews are the killers of Jesus, even though it was the Romans. So the history of Christian Europe is one of persecuting Jews. Does that mean every Christian? Of course not. There were Christians who saved Jews, who Sophie Scholl, was the White Rose. I mean, deeply Christian moral people.
Yeah.
But as a culture, the Christian civilization. So whether or not Hitler was Christian, I don't think so. I don't think Trump is Christian. I don't think, what do you mean by Christian? Like, I think people who love others are Christian and people that carry AK-47s are not. But the Christian culture gave rise to the Holocaust in a way that was not, you can't say it was related to Zoroastrianism or something. So I'm just to answer your question, whether it's rational or not, as a kid, I was like, oh man, that was fucked up. There must be something wrong with that religion.
And how old were you when you learned about this and you got exposed to it?
Gosh, I don't know. I remember.
You were young though.
Yeah, I remember one of my aunts had survived Auschwitz. Her entire family did not. Oh, her brother did. But her parents were all killed, her cousins, aunts, uncles.
Because she survived?
She survived. So I remember being really little with Auntie Hannah, and I remember playing with her in a swimming pool, and I remember being aware that she had been to Auschwitz. And I remember because I said to my mom, like, Mom, I'm thirsty. Do we have anything to drink? And my mom said, there's only water. And I was like, I hate water. And then I felt bad because I was like, oops, Hannah was like in a train for, 2 weeks without any water. And I felt kind of guilty. So I know I was little, I learned about it. I don't remember someone sitting me down and saying like, this is the Holocaust. But what's interesting is, so I think there's something there. Like, I went to Christian summer camp. I think Martin Luther King's the greatest human on earth. So I know there's wonderful goodness in Christians. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Christian. Like, I know that I can, but I'm just saying, if you ask me like psychologically, I think that predisposed me to be suspicious of religion a little bit.
So that was like kind of I don't want to, this clearly is a little bit hypocritical. Like that's where.
Or just like, this is dangerous shit, man.
Yeah.
People that think that they have God on their side, watch out. Like, they're usually not a force for good. Whether they're Orthodox Jews, whether they're Muslims, whether they're Christians, people who think I'm carrying out the will of God, watch out, man.
Why do you say that?
Well, they tend to be dangerous. Not always. And atheists can be dangerous too. People like Stalin, Mao, like, I'm not saying this doesn't, I'm not trying to make this like, oh, all atheists are moral and all. I mean, across the board, I think Christianity does a lot of good and does a lot of charitable work and a lot of altruism. And I know that people that are religiously involved do more, donate more time, money. So yeah, I don't mean, but I'm just saying, like, if you're asking me, like, was there something in my childhood that may have turned me, that would be my best guess.
Yeah. But it wasn't like a first-hand experience where you were in church and you saw the pastor and the pastor was doing this with this. Like, it wasn't.
The closest thing I can remember to that one was, so the first time I went to church ever, 15.
By yourself, not with your parents.
Right, or anywhere. Like, my first time I went to church, I was dating a young woman who was Christian. Her dad was a pastor, evangelical, non-denominational. They were very nice people, very sweet, very kind, and they invited me to church with them. And I was like, all right, I'll go. So we went to this church. He was the pastor. I felt kind of proud, like, my girlfriend's dad is the lead pastor. Hundreds of people in this church. It was in Southern California. And I remember I'm sitting there like, okay, I'm just a guest here. And at some point, they invited this young couple to the front, and they were carrying a newborn baby. And her dad said, hey, everybody, we all know this is, Rob and Rachel or whatever, and this is their beloved baby who was born 3 weeks ago. This is the baby. The baby was born with a heart defect. They say the baby's not going to live. Let's all pray for this baby, right? So the mom is crying, the dad is crying, they're holding this baby, and I'm sitting here, I'm 15, I'm like, oh my God, this beautiful, wonderful couple, and their baby is alive, but is gonna die, like it has a defective heart. So everybody's praying, right? They're praying, and I'm like, this is beautiful. This is like a community coming together. They're feeling the love. And I'm like, so I'm just 15, and I'm like, wait a minute. If God is all-knowing, he knows the baby has a defective heart. If God is all-powerful, He made the baby with a defective heart. So there's a being that's like, if we beg hard enough in our minds, like if we send enough mental emails, he'll change he'll be like, well, because 300 people in Southern California wished really hard, I think I'll make the baby live. It didn't make any sense to me. So I appreciated the ceremony, but I'm like, what the, and I was sort of like, that's kind of even worse. If there's a God, so what if these people didn't pray hard enough? Now the baby has to die? What if these people didn't belong to a church? They lived in some fucking rural community and their baby had a heart defect and they couldn't get 300 people to pray for them. The baby's gonna die? What if they were members of a big church with 10,000 people? Like, it just didn't make any sense to me. It would be like, I'll give you an example. Let's say my son likes to go skateboarding, ready? And I used to take him all over these skate parks. So let's say when he was 12, and I used to make him wear a helmet. But it's not cool to wear a helmet when you're skating. It's like at the skate parks. Most kids don't like to wear a helmet.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. But we were like, you have to. So let's say my son wasn't wearing a helmet one day, and I'm at the skate park. He's 12, and he's skating, and I'm sitting on the bench watching, and then he does a trick, and he goes on this little rail, and he falls, and he bangs his head, and he's laying there crying, and there's blood coming out. And I just sit there watching. What kind of father would I be?
Probably an unloving one.
Right. And now let's say the woman next to me says, look, that kid, he's hurt. Is that your son? And I say, yes. And she's like, why aren't you helping him? And I say, he hasn't asked. What kind of a father? He hasn't asked? Your son is bleeding on the floor. You need to help him. You're his father. You love him. He hasn't asked. So that baby in church, the parents, we need to beg God to fix what do we need? Doesn't God see that this child has a defective heart? We have to ask? What kind of a God is that? So that's why, to me, it's even worse.
Yeah.
Does God not know? Is he busy?
I mean, God can do it without you asking.
So why are we praying then?
What's supplement is not just prayer. I'm sure those people obviously took the baby to the hospital. It's not like they just prayed.
But why pray at all?
Why not?
Because isn't God all powerful? Why should my son have to ask to be taken to the hospital? Why don't I just do it? It's like, God, please cure my mom of breast cancer. You're asking. Why? This is what I'm talking about. I don't think I get that it's comforting. I'm not going to stand up in that church and be like, hey, all you people, this is do it. Like, fuck, pray, man. There was love in that church. It was love for this couple, but it didn't make any sense to me. So at that point nobody who believed in God ever harmed me. I wasn't mad at God. It literally just didn't, it's almost like, it didn't make sense to me. Yeah. I'm like, that's even worse. If there's an all-powerful being that you have to ask to cure a baby, that's even worse to me. I don't want to live in a universe where there's an all-powerful deity that causes heart disease, but then he'll cure it if you beg. Yikes. Like, what kind of a father is that? Would you want a father that says, I'll help you if you ask me? And even then I might not, but you got to ask.
Yeah.
So, I mean... Sorry to be...
No, it's not being done. It just, again, I don't think he needs us to ask. I think regardless, it will be done and I think parenting is done in a very interesting way because it kind of shows how a relationship with God would work because, a father to a son, I'm assuming you have children, you have daughters, and, just because they do something bad to you, just because you're not going to stop loving them. You're always going to love them no matter what, because they're going to be your son, they're going to be your daughter, you're going to love them.
I agree.
And they don't have to ask for a car at 6. You're probably going to give them one. And I think their relationship with God is kind of similar. Yes, we pray, and also because prayer is comforting. Like at a human level, you can't deny that. Like it is comforting, and people do that. They do it because they want to do it. The answer of evil, nobody really knows that. Nobody knows, and no Christian, no atheist, nobody knows. So if nobody has the answer to it, again, it's one of those things you can't conceive. You don't know the answer, so why even bother? I understand that.
Right.
But I think there's also like when you mentioned that, like I think God doesn't need our request for it to be happen. I think maybe it comes from just you want comfort and say, and maybe the prayer is not even asking, but it's thanking and saying, you know what, thank you, God, for that your will has to be done, and whatever it is that your will is, maybe your will is for this baby to survive, maybe it's not, but whatever, it's your will. I'm just thanking you for, it's like the same, if your son, you took your son to the thing, he's just thanking you. He doesn't have to thank you,
Right.
but he's thanking you out of love. But regardless, you were going to take him.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
I do. So you tell me if you, so I'll try another one because I don't know why I'm going here, but so you talked about like that model of a parent loving a child. So
by the way, I just want to clarify. In no way, shape, or form am I debating. I'm just strictly like curiosity.
Dude, I'm loving it.
Okay.
Are you kidding? Okay. You got me going. Let me just check the. Do you have the time?
Yeah.
I just got to be careful.
It is 9:40.
Oh, perfect.
You good?
Okay. And then you tell me, because I'll just go off. So like I think about that, like the parent loving. So I have 3 kids.
Yes.
And I agree with you. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think there's anything they could do that would make me, want them to suffer. In other words, even if
We're talking about hell.
Yeah. So even if they hated me, they're like, I hate you, you're a terrible father. And even if they adopted like different politics than me, and even if they adopted a different religion than me, and they married someone I didn't want them to marry, even if they did horrible things, like even if they started to like become murderers or something, if my child, like let's say my child, for whatever reason, started harming other people, I would be deeply sad, and I wouldn't want them to be able to continue doing that. But there's no way I would be like, I want my kid to be tortured forever.
But what if?
Like, it just doesn't, as a parent, it's irrational. As a parent, I don't want my kid tortured forever. So if God is so loving and he's like, well, I love you, but if you don't love me, you're going to hell. Come on. No parent would ever want that for their kid.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. Honestly, like, I do understand that is by your own nature. If you do believe in heaven and hell, it's by your own will that you got there. And, it's kind of like, maybe this is how I'll see it. Yes, you would still love them if they murdered people. But they murder people, and your love isn't going to get them out of what they are condemned for because of their own actions.
They may have to go to prison.
And they may have to.
But it would make me feel horrible if my child was being tortured, even if they killed other people. If they're like, and now we're taking your kid.
Yes, it would feel bad. It would feel, yes, you would feel super bad and sorry, but there's nothing in your control that you could do because they made the decision because at a certain point, everything is do whatever you want.
Yeah, but I would never create a system. So I've had friends murdered.
Yeah.
I have had several friends murdered.
Yeah.
They're killers. I don't want their killers tortured. I don't design a system.
Oh no, I wouldn't.
Right. And that's why our framers of our Constitution in the Bill of Rights said no cruel or unusual punishment.
Yeah.
But if you look at the hell of Islam, it's cruel. If you look at the hell of Christianity, it's cruel. So this is again another example of, I know deep in your heart, you would never invent a system where people are tortured for eternity. But because you see it in this book, you have to sort of do some kind of mental gymnastics to justify it. Torture's always, even Hitler. I wouldn't create a torture chamber and be like, well, now Hitler, we're going to torture you forever. It's not how I want to live. And it wouldn't make me feel better. It wouldn't bring anybody back. I don't want him to continue doing harm, so I may have to restrain him. I teach in prisons. I teach in prisons to people who do violent crimes. I see firsthand that if I were to torture those people, it would make them worse. But if I love them and treat them as human beings, it makes them better.
100%.
So God doesn't say, look, the answer to this is, rehabilitation, love, empathy, creativity, education. God says, I'm sending you to hell forever. And for a thought crime, it's not even, you don't even have to, in Christianity, you don't even have to do anything. You just have to not believe in God.
Yeah.
And you go to hell. That's silly.
Getting to like the bigger question.
No.
It's with this because I would say the bigger question with everything is the biggest question on everybody's mind is what happens when I die?
Yeah.
The afterlife, right? On this thought, you could play that. Well, if God is so loving, why would He create a hell in this? But then somebody else could say, and the analogy you just gave of Hitler, well, I don't want Hitler to burn. And then somebody else could say, well, Hitler did do a lot of bad stuff. So you're saying we both die. We both go to the same place, then what the heck matters what I do here? If I'm just going to die and nothing's going to matter, like why should I care about anything playing that extreme as well? Like, do you believe in afterlife? Do you think about that, and do you think of it being just? Like, I don't know. What's your thoughts on afterlife?
Couple things there. So I don't know what happens after we die. It's sort of like I always think of like people on a ship and they're going to some island that no one's ever been to before. We're all going there. We're all on this boat.
Yeah.
And there's one like, at this island, there's waterfalls. And you're like, really? Were you there? Well, no, but I just know. And then another person's like, on this island, there's chimpanzees. It's like, really? Have you been there? We'll find out when we get there. And I'm not going to have a debate. We're on a boat going to, no, there's chimpanzees. No, there's waterfalls. There's bananas. No, I'm sure there's bananas. Why? Because there has to be bananas because I'm hungry. Like, we'll get there. So I don't know what happens after we die. And anybody who says they know, I'm like, really? Well, unless you have evidence, good, solid evidence. I've heard people that like, oh, I died for 5 minutes and I saw God. I've interviewed people who died for 5 minutes and didn't see shit. They were like, man, my pacemaker was out for 8 minutes. I was dead. And I came back, nothing. So either they cancel each other out for me. So I don't know what happens after we die. Now, but you also implied like, where's justice? Like if there's no afterlife and there's no final judgment, and there's no like, you're not going to pay for the awful things you did and I'm not going to get rewarded for the good things I did. What is the meaning of it all? What I would say there is, I know what it feels like to suffer. It's actually an evolved capacity. My brain has developed something called empathy, compassion. So if you start to exhibit signs of suffering, I recognize that. I can tell. And I know that's unpleasant. So I don't want to live in a world where there's a lot of suffering. Just like if I were to go on YouTube right now and I would enter like Rwandan genocide and I would see videos of people hacking each other with machetes, I don't want to see that. It's horrible. I see mothers begging for their lives while Hutus are chopping them up. It's horrible. I don't need to know, well, that guy's going to get punished later and she's going to go to heaven. I know immediately right now, I want that to stop. I don't like suffering. That's my motivation. So I don't want you to suffer. I don't want to suffer. Obviously, I'm going to be more concerned if my child is suffering versus a stranger's child. That's bioevolutionary. But the ideal is I want to alleviate suffering. I know it's bad. I don't need to be, it's been proven to me that suffering's unpleasant. And I have empathy and compassion. And that's what guides me in any decision. I don't need to know. So do I think, that bad people get punished? I don't in the afterlife. Do I think good people get rewarded in the afterlife? No, I don't even know what to me, that would make me feel any better. So if I can see why people want that, but just because I want it, I'll give you an example. Let's say you got a phone call now saying all your assets have been liquidated. I don't know. Do you rent a place? Where do you live?
I live with my parents.
Okay, so let's say your parents get notified that someone has stolen all their money and they have no money and they're going to the mortgages and they're going to have to leave their house unless they come up with $10,000. So you could go buy a lottery ticket, right? So you're like, I know I'm going to win this lottery ticket because I have to. If I don't win this lottery ticket, we're going to be homeless. Your desire to win a lottery ticket doesn't make you win the lottery ticket, right? Mm-hmm. So just because you want a world where bad people get punished after the life and good people get rewarded doesn't make it so. Yeah. Unless there's evidence. So to me, we have to do the best we can in the here and now.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think most people, I think that's the most, sorry to cut you off, but I just want to emphasize that because I think I don't think I know that's the most important. Mm-hmm. And understanding that we should do this. Yeah. You should sit down with people. You should communicate. You should have empathy. And I think that's much needed in the world. Right. And that's much communication, open dialogue, debate. That's needed. And that's a net positive. Because at the end of the day, nobody knows. Nobody knows. I don't think will ever know the meaning, how we got here, morality, afterlife. And those are all nobody will ever know that. Right. Now, it's your belief as to what you want to believe. And there's some evidence backing everything. But there's never going to be 100% evidence. And I would always say, like, just because something doesn't have 100% evidence doesn't mean it's not true.
Yeah.
The same thing like a
That's
marriage.
true. That's
There's
true.
not 100% evidence that that woman loves you.
I agree.
There's no 100% evidence, but it's a beautiful thing. So just because something isn't 100% provable doesn't mean that it's not beautiful. Doesn't mean it's not true. I would actually argue that love is the truest thing
Right.
that we cannot prove it, that we don't understand, that there's evidence of it.
Right.
We can't 100% prove, but it's beautiful. So
I agree, but I can prove that
there's
my
science.
life exists
We could always, I guess we could.
just by appealing to our five senses:
Yeah.
sight, sound,
course.
touching.
Of course.
So I can't prove what love is, but I can prove that my wife, that you.
Yeah. But the sake of like love, I would say that it's just more so getting to the point of just like unknowns. There's always going to be unknowns.
But love is an abstract unknown.
Yeah.
But I don't think love knows anything or has any power
Mm-hmm.
in and of itself. It's not an entity.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, love is a dynamic.
Yeah.
So that's where we come back to God. Like God is, if you want to talk about God as a dynamic, okay. But if you want to talk about God as an entity, then I need to have evidence.
Yeah, I mean,
But at the end of the day, but see, the thing is, what you're just saying there to me, that we'll never really know 100%.
yeah.
That's why I'm not religious. Because I
Yeah.
feel like religion says, well, just accept these truths. And I'm like, well, they don't.
Which I actually don't agree with. What I do enjoy, what I do like is this, being a Christian, talking to somebody you don't agree with, being a Buddhist and talking to a Christian, being atheist and talking to,
Right.
I think either whatever you believe in, whatever you don't believe in, if you don't make it a practice of yours to explore other things and to actually not attack, but like approach something with full curiosity to the best of your ability,
I love it.
then that's the issue. When you just accept,
Yeah.
you know what, I accept Jesus
do.
Christ as Lord and Savior. I do too. But do you have you just accept that because your parents, there's nothing, you're not going to talk to a Buddhist, you're not going to talk, okay, cool. Well, I mean, that's
Right.
your thing. But
Be inquisitive.
and I think that's what's happening on the political and religious side, which is why I'm so passionate about that. I think
Okay.
whether you're Democrat, Republican, it's division, and I'm not going to talk to you. There's no middle ground.
I agree.
And if you're Christian, if you're atheist, well, there's no middle ground. You're racist, you're this, you're that. We're not going to talk. I think more of this
I agree.
is needed.
And look what you're doing with your life. You're making the world a better place.
I hope so.
You are.
God's will. I
There you go.
think it is. But I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh man, thank you.
I really I learned a lot.
Anytime. I enjoyed you. I think you have a great vibe, which is so important.
Appreciate that.
And you have a good demeanor, which is so important. And I tend to get wound up, and so I appreciated your centeredness. What else was I going to say? And I just love that we had this open conversation.
100%. 100%.
So,
Can I ask you? I want to ask you just because I feel it in my heart because I really, for people that are like myself that are young, and you teach a lot of young people that are genuinely curious about exploring spirituality and genuinely curious about seeing if Jesus is who he said he was. If what is that like? What does that journey look like?
you mean what to do?
What to do to learn? I mean, maybe I believe there is absolute truth, but getting closer to the absolute truth that somebody may believe, they just don't know what it is. What is it? Is it just reading books? Is it taking courses in college level? Is it like, what do you think is that?
That's an interesting question. I think that, I guess off the top of my head, having a broad approach to education is better than a narrow. So in other words, I think it's better to know a little bit about history, a little bit about psychology, a little bit about math and science, a little bit about music, a little bit. I think that's better than just drilling down and being like, I'm only going to study politics. I think the world is complex and humans are complex and our brains are complex. So I think it's as much as you can to dabble and to learn about different disciplines.
Yeah.
Another thing I would say is find something you're interested in and then see how different people view the same topic. So let's say you're interested in Jesus. So how do Catholics understand Jesus? How do Protestants understand Jesus? How do Jews understand Jesus? How do Buddhists understand Jesus? How do Muslims understand Jesus? How do atheists understand Jesus? And so and you're also like, well, what does history have to say? What does psychology have to say? So being interdisciplinary, I think, is in your education is really important.
I like that.
I also think being aware of your own biases, meaning like, well, what do I want to be true? And do I believe this is true because I want it to be true, or does the evidence lead me to know it's true? And it's sort of like, in other words, can your mind be changed? What would convince me that this is wrong? What would convince me that this is right? And if you can't conceive of any evidence either way, then there's something going on there. Things like that. I also think being empathetic, like realizing like people can hold different beliefs and that doesn't make them evil. Like just because someone disagrees with you doesn't mean they're bad.
No.
That we all come to these things from a different perspective and try to find what we have in common. In other words, I would argue you and me, whether you're a Christian and I'm not, I bet you if we started making lists of things we agreed with, probably 99% you and I agree with, 100%. And there's like 1% that we don't. So 100%. Like find that foundation. You meet a Scientologist, you meet a Republican, you meet a Democrat. What can we both agree on? And then from there, we can start to discuss our differences, but recognize where we agree.
Yeah. Again, that is what's more needed. And then pushing aside those people that may be a little bit extreme with the side of.
And I would say, be skeptical of the internet, because just because something's on the internet doesn't make it true.
Yeah, that's a new addition to the formula that 20, 30 years ago maybe we didn't have.
Exactly.
I appreciate you taking the time seriously.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm going to link your books in the link in the description.
That's fine.
I think people have to read them. I think you have 2 books out currently, right?
I got a zillion. I got like 7
Well, there's
books.
2 ones that I saw in
What
Audible.
it means to be moral.
Yes,
living
and
the
living
life.
Yep.
Beyond doubt. But yeah, whatever you post.
Because I have to read physical books, but like on audibles, those are the 2 that came out.
Perfect.
But again, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Also, I dug how you're really good about reminders and communicating. I appreciate that. That's awesome.
You know what I will say? There is, whether you want to believe the Bible to be true or not, there's very good principles in there. And I love the analogy and wonderful on this, because I think this will be powerful for, at least in my entrepreneurship, venture, the podcast, or my business, and I think it was Jesus that gave the analogy. Well, if you ask your earthly father, right? If you ask him for a stone, is he going to be unjust to give you a bread? No. So how much more is your heavenly Father going to give you when you ask? And then it goes on to say, knock and the door shall be open, seeking you shall find. And it was like knock 7 times, and then and the point that I'm saying is persistence is the key to anything.
That's a good thing.
And that's what I take away from me.